The Short Game is listener-supported on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and join us on our Discord, head to theshortgame.net or patreon.com/theshortgame.
Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Reagan Kelly, and I'm joined this week by all my cool co-hosts.
Nate Heininger.
Laura Nash.
And Shane Kelly. And this week, we are talking about a game whose title I will now recite. Record of Lodoss War, Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth,
I love the trailing
hyphen at the end? Yeah, well, at least on Steam there is.
I was expecting another 8 syllables at least.
Yeah, in various places, the punctuation of the title is slightly different. And depending on where you're looking, you may see something that emphasizes the Record of Lodoss War portion of the title, or you may see something where that is in tiny, tiny text way below the words Wonder Labyrinth in very large text. Like if you look at some of the posters for this, it says Deedlit in huge text, Wonder Labyrinth, very small text, Record of Lodoss War.
You know, the Wonder Labyrinth is really like a 12th character.
It has a lot of characters for a game that has no characters in it.
This entire game is incomprehensible, but we're going to get to that, and it starts at the title.
We do.
Yeah, and I'll say for the title that I couldn't even... I'll say for the title that I told my co-host that this was no longer on Game Pass because it was under a different letter of the alphabet than I expected.
Yeah. Well, I think discoverability may have been an issue for this game. And I'll also say that perhaps the confusion of its property or how vital the license is to understanding the game also may have been a detriment for the game for some people. So hopefully this will allay that concern for folks who might be interested in playing a game like this. And I had a lot of fun with this.
Yeah.
Not a perfect game, but I think pretty cool. So before we dive into talking about...
This is a very Reagan game.
This is what happens when you guys are like, I'm like, hey guys, we should pick a game. Maybe we should do a Game Pass game because y'all just got Xboxes, right? Let's pick something from Game Pass. And
you
then
picked
crickets
the game
for a little
the day
while.
after we got the Xboxes.
Yeah, but it's not like the Game Pass catalog is a secret, Laura. Y'all could have picked. I was sitting here being like, hey, we need to pick something. We need to get something picked. And y'all don't pick. I pick some anime weeaboo BS, man. That's what I do. So here we are.
Mostly, I'm pretty much cool with the fact that Reagan picks like 85% of the games that I play. But this time I thought I was on board because this is some D&D ass shit.
Yeah,
very much.
Yeah, this one didn't totally work for me. Nice try though, Reagan.
I'm sorry to hear that because I had a great time.
Some folks on this team liked it very much, so we'll let them talk first in our spirit of good stuff first.
Yeah.
Well, I want to set this up a little bit. Two things I think are worth setting up. One is why did we pick this game, and the second is why does this game exist? Why did we pick this game mostly comes down to that thank you patrons. We recently spent some of our Patreon funds on improving our various gaming setups. Basically, we just bought Laura and Nate Xboxes.
Whoop.
Yay!
So that was a wonderful thing that our patrons have done for us. Thank you, patrons.
Yes, thank you so much.
And that has enabled us to cover more Game Pass games.
How else
would
I have been able to play this?
Nate, I'm sorry that this was your first taste.
But you know what? I backed this decision. I said, let's do this game. It looked good to me too. So you're an easy target, Reagan, but I was right there next to you saying, let's do this game. It is very funny to me though that we both got these like new next gen consoles and we played something that it
looks for all the world like a PS1 game.
Yeah, PS1
wider screen.
Yeah.
I mean, is this even PS1? This really has a 16-bit vibe.
Yeah.
Well, it's very. I mean, it's explicitly aping Symphony of the Night in so many ways, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But the other aspect that led into us picking this was that we've had for a while people have been suggesting that we cover the other game by this developer that's also on Game Pass, Toho Luna Nights, which is also a Metroidvania inspired by Symphony of the Night, and also a licensed property. sort of. The Toho series is this sort of amorphous, like cross media thing. But anyway, both of these games are on Game Pass, and when it came down to it, it seemed like maybe covering the newer one of the two would be the right play. And I kind of want to go back and play that other one now because I quite liked this.
And this had the D&D element that I think was interesting. Whether it was executed, it's hard to say, but there's some D&D elements throughout this entire game that I thought were interesting, or at least sounded compelling when we were trying to decide what to pick.
Yeah, I went and checked out the anime a little bit. In case it's not clear, Record of Lodoss War is an anime. Does anybody have any familiarity with the Record of Lodoss War anime, or any? Do you ever remember seeing that around?
No.
In your anime days as a tween or whatever?
I vaguely was aware of it, but it wasn't one I ever sought out.
Yeah, same here. For me, it was like, when Shane and I were young anime liking teens going to the Planet Anime store in the Rice Village, we'd have to beg our parents or friends to drive us there.
Dude, that place was pretty sweet, but they sure did charge a lot for VHS tapes.
Yeah, man, everything was very expensive. And Record of Lodoss War, at that time, everybody was all excited about things like Evangelion, and nobody was excited about Lodoss War anymore. And the Deedlit wall scrolls were on clearance, and I didn't know what this show was, right? I always sort of thought of Record of Lodoss War as old person anime.
I don't know that I conceptualized anime quite in that way at the time, but I also wasn't super into it's weird to say now, I wasn't super into fantasy RPGs at the time, which it was, pretty clearly straight out of. The funny thing was, by this time in my childhood, I was fully into far nerdier RPGs that were setting neutral stuff.
You were into GURPS steampunk.
Yeah, I was gonna run a game of GURPS steampunk or GURPS Vikings, and yeah,
the Vikings one was cool, dude. Man, I would play a GURPS Vikings campaign now. That would be amazing.
Patreon.
I literally, that book is visible in the background on my Zoom call. I still have it on the shelf.
Dang, I want to read that book again. I'm going to borrow that from you the next time at your house.
Dear listeners, I wish you could see Nate's eyes throughout this conversation. They're getting bigger and bigger.
You mean border and border.
Brother.
Just where is this going? I love it, though.
He does not know where this road is leading to.
It didn't go anywhere. Steering vaguely back towards the subject at hand, Record of Lodoss War, very popular, but sort of early anime boom property. It was, and this is stuff I did not know about Lodoss War until we sat down to play this game, and I was looking it up because I decided I would check out a couple episodes of the anime just to be aware of what it's all about. So Record of Lodoss War began as basically whatever the 80s version of an actual play podcast it would have been back then. They apparently at that time, at least in Japan, they would publish replays or transcripts of people's Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. And the Record of Lodoss War property began as that, a magazine-based periodical transcript of a Dungeons and Dragons campaign run by the guy who later kind of became the author of this whole thing, who later adapted it into a series of novels. It became a manga. It became a OVA series, straight to video anime. And there have been multiple anime adaptations over the years. It's become this sort of big, Japanese cross media property. But it's interesting to see that it kind of began as a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, and they later apparently moved to a different system called Sword World RPG.
Everything old is new again. We've got Critical Role literally making their anime right now.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's strange to think about this being a thing that was happening even back then when Dungeons and Dragons was occupying a very different place in the cultural consciousness, and I didn't really know that it was even something people were paying attention to in Japan in the mid to late 80s.
Mm-hmm. Well, so many video games coming out of Japan in those days were very, very clearly cribbing from the D&D character sheet.
That's true. I always think about it in terms of the sort of lens of video games, though. You think about things like Wizardry or whatever, and you think about how American computer RPGs were kind of coming over to Japan and influencing the development of the sort of nascent JRPG genre, you don't really think about what was happening in the tabletop space, which I really never associate with Japan at all. But I guess that's just because it's tabletop. It's not like apart from perhaps a record of Lodoss War, it doesn't leave a cultural property behind for somebody decades later to pick up on. Anyway,
and yet,
really interesting, I thought. Yeah, here we are. Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth. I watched 2 episodes of the anime.
For people who did not watch the anime, can you at least explain what Deedlit and Wonder Labyrinth are?
What is a Deedlit?
Deedlit is one of the main characters of Lodoss War.
The only girl.
Stars, the only girl. Actually, is that one person?
That's from the intro. The second sentence of the game is the only girl fell in love with Wonder.
Right.
It's really,
there's one of them that's very androgynous, and I didn't watch enough of the show to really, really peg them all.
Elves.
Deedlit is like a high elf. It's very D&D party like 1.0, right? So you've got Parn, the Dubro Knight.
Parm.
Parm.
Like
That's
Parmesan.
right. Sorry.
No, it's
No,
I think it's
Gene
Parm.
Parmesan. It was me all along.
Oh
my gosh, Gene!
No, it's Parn. It's Parn, right?
I thought so.
I'm pretty sure it's.
Anyway,
I'm sure it's Parn. Yeah.
Here, I can scroll through the the Wikipedia doesn't have a list of characters.
I'm looking at it right here. It's Parm.
All right. It's one of those things with Japanese, like who knows how it's been transliterated, but anyway, you've got that guy, you've got like a dwarf who carries an axe, you've got Deedlit, who's a magic using elf who does things with spirits, you've got some kind of cleric guy who wears a little yarmulke, and you've got another guy who's also some kind of magic user. I think maybe some kind of a paladin or something. And
it's kind of probably worth aligning this with like the D&D of the era, the early D&D. Like elf and dwarf were classes. Like there wasn't. You had like wizard, elf, dwarf, fighting man was a class, and it wasn't like the kind of over elaborate
fighting man.
Yeah, I just love fighting man as a class. But yeah, so it was pretty simple.
So yeah, this very much reflects the like standard tabletop role playing of its day. And I like I said, I only watched a little bit. The very first episode is worth a watch if you watch nothing else, in that it just like absolutely has the structure of like a single session of an RPG. They're like, we've got to get somewhere fast, or we're going to take a detour through these ancient dwarven cave ruins, and we're going to fight some monsters on the way. At the end of the big tunnel, there is a dragon. The end. And like it's this entirely self-contained thing that sets up nothing. It's just like a D&D one shot. And then after that, it clearly is beginning to set up like some kind of deep lore about the world and whatever. And episode 2 didn't really get me much, kind of tuned out. But like the first episode was very much just like a D&D one shot. So that sort of sets the tone for what this is. This is not necessarily just a game for Lodoss War nerds, of which I do not count myself one. Like I have a lot of anime to watch, and this one's probably like low on my list. But it is a game for people who like, I pretty much say explicitly, Symphony of the Night. Not just Metroidvanias. This is basically a Symphony of the Night clone.
I mean, there has to be some degree of fan base that is still out there for them to name the game what they named it.
Oh yeah,
it's absurd. It's the worst.
I think that's one of the things that like people really reacted to this when this was released. Is like, why make a licensed game based on this 90s anime that people don't really talk about that much anymore in 2020?
Right.
And I think that's kind of just what Team Ladybug does. Like their previous game was also this licensed thing. They've done other past games, but I feel like it we talked last episode just recently about like the sort of doujin game scene in Japan, and like a lot of people there's a sort of scene for this kind of thing in Japan where like people will create unlicensed games based on existing properties. And I think this is sort of in the spirit of that doujin game scene, in that like they're fans of this and they wanted to make a game, and they were in this case able to work with the rights holders. The guy who started Lodoss War, I guess, was involved. But it has that feeling of just like a fan game.
Yeah.
It feels like just like some people who really liked Lodoss War and Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and like in a different world, in a different era, this could have been a ROM hack of Symphony of the Night. Instead, it's this pretty fully fleshed out and well done 5 to 8 hour Metroidvania based on this 90s anime that's completely out of date.
Yeah, I just wonder if they like it almost. I think it's a pretty competent game, and I think its biggest, like some of its biggest struggles is that it's like trying to fit in that world, and it is impossible to tell who is who and what's going on. And so I'm like, but the core of the game, the actual Metroidvania, the combat, the platforming, all feels good. And so it's like, I wish that they had just, instead of trying to like cram in all of these characters and make something with that, just make their own game that is not tied to a crazy 90s anime. But I don't know. Obviously I'm sure this was great for people who were fans of the show. But with no knowledge of the show, they make no effort to bring you into the world. It's just like you just get dropped in, and I guess you're supposed to know all these characters and care about them.
I have not played Symphony of the Night, but I've played Metroidvanias. This is Metroidvania, the Metroid for sure. I think for me, one of the things I had trouble with, I think might actually be part of the license game. And that's because that I think the powers were not titrated to my liking at the beginning of the game. Like I wanted to introduce something and get sick of it. But I think it's because this character, Deedlit, is a high elf with 3 powers, and like you got to get all 3 powers in as fast as humanly possible. So to me, that felt rushed. I wonder if it's because that's an expectation that like you're going to have all the skill sets of this person to play the game. If you're going to play as her.
Yeah.
So I give it a little slack for it. For me, like I like a game that I learn a mechanic, I explore that mechanic for a while, I get a new one, I layer it. Like I want a little bit more gatekeeping, even in a short game. Mm-hmm. So for this one, getting all 3 of the spirits really fast felt aggressive. And I think it's probably because it's like not having the full power set of a superhero. You're going to be kind of pissed. Like, what if Spider-Man couldn't shoot webs and could only sling? Like, you'd be like, what's going on? Like, I'm wondering
I think that
if
may
that's
definitely be a factor, but I think another aspect is that, like, I don't want to spend the entire episode comparing things back to Symphony of the Night, a game that not even all of us have played, which, is a great game. I really in fact, there have been times where I thought, like, can we squeeze it in for this show? I think it would be really great. Maybe we do an episode of the short game where we only talk about the first castle of Symphony of the Night. Would that be fair if we omitted the second castle? But no, like that's part of why I wanted to do this, was like it's a symphony of the castle, that is, theoretically pretty short. But a big difference between Symphony of the Night and later games in the genre that it pioneered is that it leans a lot more into the RPG side of things, with things like tons and tons of items with lots of stats, and that do various different things. And in some ways, especially in some combos, can really break the game, where you can feel super OP in certain weird ways. And this game captures that. And I think that's kind of part of what you're seeing there, Laura, is that like this game drops like tons of stuff for you to use, and it lets you kind of almost break the game by being, like getting lots of spells that do weird different stuff, and that let you like, you can cheese the game for unlimited money if you want. You can use various different combos of spells to distract. There's like things that will let you like distract bosses, so you can get them into endless patterns where you can kill them without them doing any damage to you, that kind of stuff. And this has that kind of feeling of like they're just willing to throw a bunch of stuff in and let you experiment with it and not worry too much if it kind of breaks things. And that's sometimes bad, but also like sometimes really cool. So anyway, that's I think part of what you're seeing there is like, it just dumps all that stuff on you, and it's like, here, you figure out your build.
Laura, you called out kind of the way that the powers are kind of gate kept in the game, and they sort of but the thing that I have a question about here, and I'm not sure if this is a Symphony of the Night thing or not, one of my main expectations coming into a game like this is that Metroidvania games are based around exploring, then getting some sort of new traversal mechanic, and then backtracking to use it to explore more and new areas. Mm-hmm. And that's not really what this game does, at least in the areas that I did. Mostly it was like you'd get to a boss and then it would unlock a corresponding colored door and you would just progress.
I don't think you played probably far enough. This is pretty
there's definitely stuff that like that definitely happens. There's colored doors that get unlocked by a colored switch that you have to usually get past a boss or tough area to get to. But there's also things like water breathing, double jump, triple jump,
slide.
There's sliding to get through small areas. There's other stuff like that definitely are like traversal and combat stuff that does open up new areas for you. And I don't know, I found it was pretty successful at that sort of specific genre thing.
Yeah, what I do like on that, I think that's one of the things the game does really well. Is one of the reasons we covered this is because it's a short Metroidvania, and that's incredibly rare, right? And I think it's not that short as we discovered. I think we were thinking this was more like 5 to 6 hours, and it's probably more like 10 to 13. Your mileage may vary on your ability to to fight, I guess, how much of a fighting man you are.
I know none of us have completed the game. I got to the final boss, and I think everyone else got to some other various different portions. I just literally got to the final boss right before we ended up needing to record. And for me, my clock is at 11 hours, which is, longer than all estimates I saw put it around 5. And I'm not really sure who these 5-hour completionists are. I think they must have either I always find myself a little bit at odds with the time to beat on how long to beat, but this felt like a pretty egregious difference to me. So I'm not really sure if maybe I didn't spend a lot of time idling at menus. Maybe the max amount of total wasted time I have there is maybe an hour or two.
I don't know. Maybe there's if you're a Record of Lodoss War fan, the right, the path to take, and those of us who don't know, we're
all the great scenes in Lodoss War where they show you where all the breakable floors are. In Labyrinth, and you have to remember that from the 90s.
If only I had watched it. Yeah. I've put definitely more than 5 hours, and I'm not as far as Reagan, but I made it pretty far into the game, and I did think they did a pretty good job actually of a really tight Metroidvania where. Most of the long ones that we're talking about, most Metroidvanias, once you get a new double jump or whatever, there's so many different opportunities to go back and do it. There's only a few in this. It's all a lot tighter. It's a lot smaller. Once you unlock double jump, you're going to go back to a couple places where you knew you couldn't get before, but it's not extensive. And there's a good map that will show you.
Very Symphony of the Night map. It's extremely like the Symphony of the Night map, although maybe a little more color coding.
Yeah, there's good color coding. It's all the little, grid basically. And if you've entered into a room that has a doorway and you don't go through that doorway, you'll see it on the map that there's a place I haven't gone to. And if you go to a yellow door and you don't have yellow doors unlocked yet, there's a big yellow bar on the map. So once you do unlock yellow doors, it's pretty easy to look back at the map and think, all right, where were all the yellow doors that I couldn't get to? And it expedites a lot of that. That said, it did also leave me, I found myself checking the map a lot. And I felt like I was a lot in the map in this game and a lot less exploring and more just I was never felt compelled to actually remember anywhere where anything was, and I just spent a lot of time in the map, which is not necessarily the most fun, but it was the most effective way to play for me.
I definitely feel that. It's sort of par for the course for me with that Metroidvanias, though.
Yeah,
there's standouts like Hollow Knight, where I didn't just feel like mastery of the space. I literally felt like I had lived there.
I live there
long
now.
enough
Dirtmouth is my home.
Yeah, like, and I just know how to get everywhere. But this is that sort of like check the map a lot experience is part of the fun for me, because with games that treat their map like this, there's an element of like looking at the map and trying to guess at where secrets are that I find really part of the experience. Like, you know, you'll see like, oh, there's an unexplored square with no doors into it in the middle of the map. There must be a secret passage into that from one of these 4 sides, and I bet if I go poke around, I can find something cool.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. Like, you know, you get this sense of like, well, I bet there's something there, and based on the map, I bet there's a secret way into it over here. And more often than not, you're right. You find that destructible wall or what have you, and you find a cool weapon. And this game does a ton of that. Very similar to Castlevania in that way. And I found that, I always find that to be like really, I just love that. I love finding secrets on maps.
I didn't realize there were secrets in that way in this game for a little while, which, you know, I don't know. I wasn't expecting it. And they'll be like completely obscured where like the wall is just flat black, no indicator. But if you go up and you hit it, it disappears. And now there's a door that you can go through.
Most of them they've got little cracks on them. So if you're very observant,
no Reagan, there were no indicators on these. And but once I realized that there was secrets, I was a little more perceptive to them. But it was also funny though, because one of like the second or third that I found after realizing that there were secrets, it was just a big ass minotaur in it. And I was like, so
it's like, screw you, dude.
Yeah. I was like, oh, hell yeah, I found a secret. And then you go in there and just get your ass kicked. Yeah. So,
I don't want to feel too bullet pointy here, but I feel like there's some areas about this game that we absolutely have to talk about. And the first is the pixel art. I think maybe the standout best thing about this game, as far as I'm concerned, is its pixel art. I think that Team Ladybug has absolutely nailed the aesthetic that was put to such good use in Symphony of the Night. Here, it's like it really feels like an extension of that aesthetic. The character models are really good. There's really good animation. They figured out how to reproduce the weird walk cycle that Alucard has in Symphony of the Night. That, I always figured was like he has this weird floaty walk because he's a vampire, and I guess high elves have it too. She just has this sort of like long loping movement as she's running around. Just
did
incredible
anybody else have
pixel
to
art
turn
animation.
off the like ghost image trail that she leaves?
I loved it. Yeah, I thought that was so
I had to
cool.
turn that off almost like right away.
That's another.
I'm glad they had a
aspect of
setting
it,
for it, because I found it just I found it distracting and hard to tell where she actually was.
Yeah, I can see that, and I'm glad they have a setting for it too. But like, it was another way that it sort of felt very like, I don't know. I thought that was like really visually cool, and it kind of disappeared into just like cool background to me after a while. Another thing about her movement is like she takes a while to turn around, in a way that is sort of unusual, and also felt like sort of like a specific nod to like Alucard's weird movement in Symphony of the Night, because you go to, you're pressing right on the D-pad and you go to press left, and she has to execute an animation to turn from right to left. And it's just a weird thing to see when, most of the time in pixel art, 2D platformers these days, that's instantaneous.
Yeah. And the D&D stuff, it's just kind of fun to have a game that all of the monsters and whatnot are just straight up D&D monsters. So you're fighting minotaurs, like little goblins.
The goblins were good.
Like dragons. All of them seem to come straight from D&D, and they're very well animated and great to look at. And
this game has one of the all-time best mimics I've ever seen.
Yes, in a video game. The mimic is great.
You walk past a chest. And of course, in a D&D inspired property, you never trust a chest. But if you walk past these chests, a kind of green shape will creep out of it and grab your character with this very quick little swipe and pull Deedlit into the mouth of the chest where it does some crunchy animations until finally it spits her back out.
The fake door is great too. The door mimic is also awesome. You're like, why is there a door just right there in the middle? And then you're like, oh god damn it. Should have seen that coming. You can't roll investigation checks in this game.
Well, mimics are generally not in video games, so I can forgive you for being like, oh, it's a portal.
Laura, have you ever played Prey?
I have not played Prey.
That is the best mimics ever in video games. That's a what is that? Like a first person what's the word that I'm looking for, Shane?
It's like a
immersive sim. Thank you. Yeah. From the people that made like Dishonored and some other things.
It's on Game Pass, right?
I was thinking it's on Game Pass, yeah.
Yeah, you're going to walk into rooms in that game and be like, did that coffee cup just vibrate? Like freak out. That's a great game.
Sounds fun.
It's the only game I know of where you can become a mimic. It rules. I love that game. But yeah, second best mimics I've seen in video games here.
As Laura was saying before, we get Deedlit's, essentially full elemental power set pretty early on. One of the very first things that you do is you find her two spirit buddies. One of them is a fire spirit, and the other one is a wind spirit. And I already forgot their names. Salamander. Sylph and Salamander.
Yeah.
And so the way that you use those powers in game is, you have a button that can activate kind of an elemental power, and you're going to swap between the two. And you have 2 meters of energy for each of those two, for each of the 2 spirits. So when you're using a fire ability, you're draining the fire bar, and vice versa. The way you recharge them, though, is to deal damage while you have the opposite one equipped. So if you swap to the air spirit, then you're recharging the fire abilities. And what adds a little bit more to this, and what I thought was actually one of the nice kind of affordances for the player here, is if you refill both of the bars all the way, which is they have like 3 levels.
Either one.
It's just
Oh, it is either one?
Yeah.
I thought it was both. Then you will slowly recharge your health bar, which is quite nice.
And the training for this is one of the funniest things I've seen in a video game in a long time. They just have giant hunks of meat hanging from the ceiling, and you hit the meat enough times to charge it, and then it's like, please switch to the other power, and you switch it, and you just continue shanking this giant piece of meat hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah.
And it's like, and now you have your health back.
Well, and those are great.
That's it.
They are at a lot of save points right before boss fights, and so it's. A lot of games will do this when you're like approaching a difficult area. It's like, oh man, there's all these health potions, or I've been.
How many pots are there?
Yeah, I've been playing. I've talked about it on the show a little bit, but Horizon Zero Dawn. Every time you're about to enter into some sort of cutscene mega fight, it's like, oh, there's all this medicinal flowers everywhere. What a crazy, coincidence! Like the game provides you with resources for the upcoming fight, and it's a little ominous. You're about to get
a side of beef here. I'm about to run into a dragon.
Well, so with this game though, it's not ominous at all. It's like hilarious. It's like, why in the middle of this wonder labyrinth are like there's just giant racks of unknown giant beast meat that you're just going to wail on to get both of your meters up.
Your dragon snacks.
Later. But yeah, it's this was a really cool mechanic. The sort of balance where you're really trying to keep them at max level at 3, because not only is it healing you constantly, it's also increasing your damage. So the longer you can have that at a 3, the better you're going to be doing. And it only takes 1 hit to get you out of level 3, and then only a couple hits to get out of 2 down to 1. And then you're back right at the beginning, and you have to switch to the other element to recharge them. And it's this kind of balancing act of keeping, at least the way I played it is like I always tried to keep at least 1 at a 3, so that I would always have this as like a backup that I could step to the side and heal. But the game complicates it even more, though, because you can't really do that because there's enemies as the game goes on that become resistant to one type of damage. So there'll be stuff that do not take damage if you are in wind form. So you have to switch to fire and vice versa. And then sometimes they will have those together in like one grouping. So you have to switch back and forth. And then also, if the enemy deals damage that is either fire or wind, you absorb that damage if you are in that elemental state. So the whole game really revolves around these elements and being in the right one and keeping them charged so that you can stay alive.
Yeah, it sounds really complicated when you lay it all out like that, but I think it's a really well-designed system because it really incentivizes you to be constantly switching and constantly aware of what type of elemental damage is incoming and what type of elemental weaknesses the creatures around you have. And by the end of the game, I was just like fluidly switching back and forth, instantaneously mid-fight, trying to, keep both of them topped up and all the while being constantly healed, because if you're able to avoid taking damage very much, because you get hit once, it might knock one of your meters out, but then of course you can switch to the other meter if it's still full and top up your health. And maybe that puts you at a disadvantage in terms of damage because maybe you're doing less damage because you're not on the correct color or whatever. But that might put you at this little disadvantage. But if you can play it right, then you top yourself back up and be right back in the fight. I really like this system a lot. They said they were inspired by Ikaruga for this, and I really see it. Ikaruga, if you're not familiar, is like a top-down, like it's a shoot 'em up, a very popular top-down shoot 'em up. It was on GameCube and Dreamcast and I think and arcades, and I think it's on Steam and everything now. But it's this incredible game where you are. It's a bullet hell shoot 'em up where there's bullets coming in that are some white and some black bullets, and you can swap your ship between white and black to negate certain types of damage. And it has some of these same mechanics, and it's really interesting to see that applied to a Metroidvania, which I don't think I've seen before. Lots of people have taken that sort of color or element swapping mechanic from things like Ikaruga, but like here it seems really particularly well deployed.
Yeah.
So probably the most successful mechanical thing about this game.
Yeah, I think it's the thing that makes this game fun. I think it's the interesting part of this game that makes it a good mechanical game. One thing I wish it did more of, and this is just a personal preference, but there is some light platforming in this game that takes advantage of the system as well, where there will be like a pillar of fire energy, and you have to be in fire elemental to go through it. And then right after that, there'll be like a pillar of wind energy. And one thing we haven't said too is that when you're in wind form, you can hover, which is cool.
And when you're in the fire form, you have a different so like movement wise, the wind form can hover and the fire form can do both can do like a dodge, like a jump, like a slide kind of move. But the fire form, your slide has iframes through enemies. So you can like move past enemies that you'd bounce off of if you were in wind form. So they both have their little advantage.
And you can walk through lava when you are fire. And so they will do some interesting things with this where like there will be crisscrossing, swirling pillars of the two different energies, and you have to like kind of deftly pass through them, swapping the element to match the pillar. There are times where you need to like hover across, briefly switch into fire in order to get across a barrier, and then very quickly go back to hover so that you don't, go back to wind and into a hover so you don't fall into spikes or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoyed that. I always love good platforming, and I just thought that like utilization of the two different elements in the platforming was at times even more fun for me, at least, than the combat of it. And this game is like 95% combat and like 5% sort of traversal elements.
That's true. It doesn't really lean much on the like platforming, and what platforming it has, I found mostly more of a frustration than fun.
Yeah.
I remember a few of those hallways like what you're describing, where there was like spikes on the floor and ceiling and only a few places to safely land, plus you have to quickly toggle your element thing in order to not bounce off into the spikes and die. And those got pretty frustrating after a while.
See, yeah, that's where this just comes to personal preference, obviously, because I really enjoyed that stuff, and I found the combat, well, the elemental system was really interesting and fun. Like, I found the combat often kind of frustrating. So,
well, you told me that you were using the big swords. That's your first mistake. Those are a pain to use. This game has a bunch of different styles of weapons, very similar to Symphony of the Night as well, where you've got like big overhand swords that hit above you. You've got little needle-like swords that only hit in front of you. You've got a boomerang. You've got also a bow and arrow, and there's multiple different types of bows and arrows that do things like homing arrows or arrows that split off into 3, that kind of thing. So lots of options.
Yes, but I think to me it was more like I would rather have 4 weapons that I transfer. I understand that's part of the style, but I think that's something I was like, hi, I've already got magic and 2 elemental powers and like 10 swords. Like, I played like an hour in, I had like 10 swords, 2 bows. I was like, wow, what is happening? Like, why do I have all these things to do?
just sell it. Just sell all that shit.
Yeah. It was very, I understand the style, but to me it was more like, it also, if you die, you have to then recollect everything, and you have to redo, like,
If you
I don't
haven't
want to do a
saved.
bow puzzle again if you haven't
Yeah.
saved. Like, a bow puzzle, like, to get a thing, I feel like there should be a door to save right after that, right? So it was just funny to me, like, what the game was optimizing for me to have all of these ways to kill. And I was like, but the 2 buttons I started with seem to be doing just fine. Like, I don't need this right now. It wasn't a, I didn't need a, I didn't need a dag. I was blurted out that the dagger was so big, by the way. The dagger was enormous.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It is a giant knife. They call it a dagger. It is roughly the size, it's like 2 of my heads stacked is considered a dagger in this. Again, it's fine if that's what you want, but to me, I would rather have mastered 3 very different weapons than continue to collect stronger versions of 20.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does have a lot, and especially for a game that's this short, it feels like they were kind of definitely like trying to imitate Symphony of the Night there, where there's, I think that game has like over 100 weapons or something like that. It's just absolutely nuts. Here, it's at least 15 or more swords or main melee weapons, and then probably a similar number of the bow and arrow setups.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was just sort of like, well, this is a slightly stronger version of a thing I had before. That's fine, I guess. That you keep that power curve on the upswing, and that's one of the ways they do it.
Maybe I just want my bow to get powered up, right? Maybe it's the same thing mechanically, but to me it feels better to get your bow enhanced than to get a new bow.
I hear you, but game. This is again like a taste thing, but like, I love getting a new weapon that has a name and a little sprite and a description to read. Like, there's nothing more fun than, like, I don't pick up like a +1 to bow. I pick up something called like Grabthar's bow or whatever,
It depends. I love that in Breath of the Wild. And this one, probably because they felt so similar mechanically, I didn't see a difference. So
I do want to talk, though. You mentioned, I think, one of the things that cracked me up the most about this game that was very unexpected, and maybe these are in Symphony of the Night. I also have not played that, so maybe we should just do it for the show. I know that's like an all-time classic game, but
I would play that again in a
arrow
heartbeat,
puzzles.
It's not short.
Yeah. Are there rope tricks in Symphony of the Night?
It's been a few years, but there are things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, things where you have to hit something at a distance with. I don't remember there being quite such an emphasis on like bouncing arrows off of metal plates. That's a really big element here.
Yeah, I was just so surprised. You enter into a room and there's like, it starts out really simple where a door is being like held in place, and if you shoot your arrow through the rope, it'll cut the rope and the door will fall over, and it gets increasingly complicated to the point where there's like magnets that impact the direction of your arrow, and you have to like bank shot them off of like 4 metal curves and aim it just right so your arrow hits at just the right series of bounces. It gets impacted by the magnet, so its curvature is just right, and it'll cut that rope and open the door. Or eventually, like, you're spinning gears and shit that you have to fire multiple arrows to get them to continue to spin so that you can get through. And I didn't not like it. It just was so unexpected to me that there's all these goofy rope trick puzzles in the middle. I guess maybe that's why they call it a wonder labyrinth. You never know.
It felt like a different game.
Yeah.
I was just like, what's happening? Why am I bouncing arrows off the walls now?
Yeah, I always like those types of puzzles, so I kind of enjoyed it, but it feels very out of place.
I like that too, yeah.
No, I like the puzzles. They just didn't feel organic, or there wasn't a reason for them to be there, and then they would just go back to...
There's not a reason for the Minotaurs either, Laura.
There's no reason for anything.
But it's a haunted castle. There can be like plenty of goblins and imps and whatnot, but like
sure.
to like fight a bunch of imps, then go into a room that's just a bow puzzle, and then go on the other side and there's imps again. I was like, what's going on?
It gets even better. There's like a Zelda style bow and arrow game, like deep in the labyrinth for some reason.
Wow.
I didn't spend any time with that. Or you can like get coins for hitting trick shots.
Yeah. It's like moving targets, that you have to hit exactly right. And I didn't play it enough to even really know what the rewards were. I assumed there was some sort of high score element that you'd get something nice for it, but I was like,
I was like, I'm not with you.
Yeah, that's same.
Thank you.
There's also the full, essentially craps, like a really simplified craps game that you can play where you're betting. I guess it's probably a character from the show that's like a fun,
it's the thief character from the D&D party type.
And you can.
His name is Woodchuck.
It's that's a good name for a character.
Stealing that for my next D&D character.
So you can go and play craps, basic, really simplified version of craps with Woodchuck and gamble your money.
Something I found that was really funny about that was like they seem to almost be communicating to you. Like this is something I did in various Castlevanias as well, where they have similar like gambling things where like they put a save point real near that gambling game. So of course, that's the developer telling you, hey, you need some money and you're willing to like save scum a little, go make big bets. If you lose, reset your save and try again, right? Like that's what these things are for. You're spending time in order to buy money in the game, right? And the developers know. They know what you're doing. And here, I was like, okay, fine. I would like to buy a bunch of healing items to cheese past some bosses. Let me go spend some time brute forcing Woodchuck's dice game. And the first time I did that, it worked fine. I got some money. I went to go do it. I went and saved. I went and did it again. I lost money. And so then I closed without saving and reopened rebooted back into the save. And that second time I did it, Woodchuck said, I forget exactly what he said, but he called me on it. He said, "Oh, you reset your save game. Well, I'm keeping an eye on you." And then, I was successful that time. And then I went and did it again. And he says the same thing again. It doesn't change his line, but he continues to call you out on save scumming. And eventually the game gets hard. I think what it's doing is the game's odds get worse and worse and worse as you do that.
That's so funny.
So by the third time I tried it, every single bet I made lost. It was ridiculous. The only way I could win a bet was if I also made an equal and opposite bet, canceling it out. So it was
so funny.
I thought it was very funny.
Also, shame on you.
I know. Oh, what a
Mr. Resetti is going to get you.
I know. money becomes completely like any Metroidvania, money becomes completely meaningless by the end anyway. But it would have been nice to be able to like really stock up on healing items early on for some of those places where I kept getting killed in hallways or whatever.
Well, you were giving me shit about the weapon, but the weapon I landed on that I used the most was the most expensive weapon from the store. So, I think it was.
Yeah, I actually never ended up buying a weapon because every time I would go to the store, whatever weapon I had just picked up was slightly better than anything in the store. So,
well, the Hollow Sword, which also made me want to play Hollow Knight. There's been a lot of Hollow Knight discussion going in the Discord too, and then we played this, and I'm like, I just want to play Hollow Knight again. This game is fun, but I just want to play Hollow Knight again.
It made me feel the same way a little bit.
This is the curse of the short game.
Yeah.
Is that
the long
so many
games,
great games are
they
not
haunt us.
short.
I want to talk briefly, because we're getting close to the end of our time, but I want to talk briefly about the bosses, because I think they are an interesting aspect of this game that is both a highlight and an area where I had some trouble, and I think, Nate, you did too. This game has some pretty good boss fights. There's like 3 or 4 big dragon boss fights, but there's also some interesting boss fights against like human-sized characters. There was a one that I thought was really good that was like a duel where you were fighting 2 big spirits that were also like a fire and a wind spirit matching your own, but big and mean. The boss fights in this consistently found ways to make you really use the element switching, and I really liked I liked the way they looked, and they had a lot of different attack phases, cool stuff where they'd move from the foreground into the background, or and vice versa. So overall, I think the boss fights in this are one of the highlights, but they're also really easy to cheese. I'm not sure how intentional that is as part of the design.
Yeah, it was interesting to me. I wouldn't even say I had trouble with them, because I died way more in not boss fights from what I found to be sort of like frustrating sort of knockback and like placement and things like that. But like the boss fights, it was almost underwhelming, because you would get these really cool set pieces, great sprites, and you could tell that like what you're supposed to be doing is really manipulating the elements. But I found that almost all of them I could just brute force right through them, and I beat most of them on my first try, and rarely it would take a second one, and then eventually take a couple more than that. But for the most part, I would be like, oh, this is awesome, and then just go stand right next to him and just swing my big sword, really, really fast, and it'd be dead before I really had to engage with its element swapping piece that much, a little bit to sort of survive. But it felt like there was a lot of work going into like the element switching, and I felt like most of these boss fights took like 15 seconds.
Yeah, I think usually my approach with these sorts of boss fights is like I usually go in for my first run where I'm literally just like trying to survive and figure out what their phases are all about, right? And
so we have completely opposite approaches then, because I'm like, go in there and just hit it as many times as I can before I die. And
so I mean, I almost always die my first approach on a boss like this, because it's sort of just a fact finding mission. And then once I've done that, I'll usually try a few times to just sort of play by its rules. So this has these clearly defined phases with attacks that you're clearly supposed to jump around, or that you're supposed to just phase through with the element switching and so on. And so I try a few times to play by its rules, and the boss fights were actually pretty tough. Some of them I was able to get through, especially the early ones. The earliest ones that I got through, sort of playing by the rules of the boss fights, were really fun. The early, like the red dragon fight, the fight with the duel between the 2 spirits, I played those sort of straight, and they were great. And then a little later in the game, I started unlocking just all these OP spells you can use, and started totally cheesing bosses. I try the like direct approach and find the boss felt really hard or even kind of unfair. And then I realized, oh, if I do this one thing, then the boss becomes trivial. And sometimes it was just like what Nate was doing, find the right place to stand and hit them with your sword until they die. The big one that was a real surprise to me and felt like game breaking to the point where I almost wish I hadn't collected it is that there's a spell you can collect in this game that lets you turn invisible, but it's not straight up invisibility. It's sort of the like classic ninja style thing where you leave a sort of image of yourself behind that is a dummy that attracts the enemies, and then you kind of invisibly move around the screen and do whatever, and it'll stay on screen until you run out of magic energy. And there's lots of ways to refill your magic energy by soaking elemental damage, so you can basically keep that up indefinitely if you're smart about it, especially during a boss fight where a lot of elemental damage is floating around. So for a ton of these bosses, I would just drop that dummy in the corner, back off a little bit, get behind the boss, and hit him until he died while he was pointing his weapons and all of his attacks in the corner because of the dummy. And that felt like a cheese. It's obviously a cheese. It's like pretty cheap. I'm of two minds about this because like that's the kind of thing that like, did that enhance my experience playing that way? Probably not. I think I probably would have had more fun playing straight boss fights that had a more traditional structure and where I wasn't cheesing them. But in general, I like games that let you either like beef your character up in order to get past a difficult boss, by grinding, or that let you cheese a boss if you discover a cool interaction or some cool way to do something. I like when games let you cheese bosses. I think that's actually a really valuable thing sometimes. So I'm really of two minds here. Like, I think I still had fun beating these bosses, but I also felt like I was getting away with something, and not always in the like fun, oh man, I'm so clever, I got away with something kind of way. I kind of felt like I was like, just, hit A to skip boss on some of these, despite the fact that it really felt like this was what the game was incentivizing me to do.
Well,
it felt kind of weird.
It's still your choice to play it that way,
Yeah, but like that's the thing you like when you're designing a game, like you have to expect that like players will go for what's effective, not what's fun, and the game design job is to make sure that those two things align.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. I'm sort of undecided at this point about the bosses. I think they are mostly good, but not excellent.
Well, I think they're good from a design and like a visual element. I think from a gameplay element. Yeah, I think they are. There's too many ways to not have to engage in the system that the boss is clearly executing. Like you said, it's very clearly there's phases and shifts and all these things that it wants you to do, and it's really easy to not do that.
And I prefer this approach to something like what we saw in like Metroid Fusion, where the bosses had comparatively much simpler, phases and were, huge damage sponges. And the whole approach for most of them was basically like an HP race where you're trying to do as much damage as possible before you die. I prefer this approach. If the choice is between like do some really convoluted thing or do the cheese versus there is no cheese, just stand here and try to get out as much damage as you can before you get killed. Like, I'll take this, but it's not, I look back with fondness on my controller throwing boss fights in something like Hollow Knight, where
I love cheese.
Yeah. Anyway, that's enough about the bosses. They were cool, but they're a mixed bag, he said, getting out his game review phrase book. What else is there to say about this game? Anything?
There was a scene. I'm sorry, this is spoilers, but there was a scene about halfway through where a character gets killed, and your character reacts in a way that seems to imply that this character has meaning. And I was like, who just who is that?
Are you talking about when Parn gets stabbed? Or Parm,
whichever one it was. I was like, why? I didn't know that they were on our side, or that like there is so much. The dialogue is wonderful. It's like watching It's like watching The Room or something put through.
Oh man, that's rough.
But put through like an anime filter, where like it's just everything is over the top and absurd, and it comes at you so fast. But at the same time, like completely sporadic. You'll just enter into a room and it'll do like a little TV glitch thing. And
I did not hit her. I did not. Oh,
yeah.
hi, Parm.
Yeah, it's like it's like that, It's just like, do I?
And it all goes green. It's very strange.
Like, do I?
It is very strange. I think it.
Damn it,
kind
Carla!
Of works if you just like ignore the plot. Like this was a game that like the plot, such as it is character from show you've never watched is trapped in a mysterious labyrinth where ghosts, seemingly sort of characters that she presumably knows because she seems to know their names and they're probably characters from the show, but you don't know that because you don't watch the show, periodically appear to haunt her as she tries to figure out why she's trapped in this mysterious
ghosts?
Labyrinth.
I thought they were just.
So I have gotten to the end of the game. I don't know if we need to. Whatever. Spoilers here. Like the plot doesn't make any sense or difference anyway. And that's kind of part of the pitch here. I think is like if you're not a Lodoss fan, you can ignore every word spoken in this game, and it will be fine.
But there's a lot. It's still a lot.
Like
though.
this
There's
takes place long after the plot of the anime, but before there's some sort of like second series anime. Parn is already dead in the plot of the anime. She's mourning for him, and she's trapped in this game in some kind of wonder labyrinth of the mind or something. Like this has no bearing on the plot of the anime. It will illustrate nothing because it is its own little microcosm. If you are a diehard Lodoss head or whatever, I doubt that this is going to do much for you story wise, apart from just letting you, see cool sprites of the characters that you already like. I don't think the story here is going to be interesting, even to people who know the anime. I don't think that's really what it's for. What was the story for Symphony of the Night? Vampire guy comes to castle, fights other vampire guy. There's nothing in between.
So, but I haven't played that, but for the story not mattering, you sure get a lot of it in this game, and that's what
I'm really surprised. Really, because it didn't seem like that much to me. It's just like a little bit.
Yeah, but this is your thing. You're like, ooh, give me more of the story, It's not like overbearing or anything, but like it's pretty frequent where you're gonna see a little cut scene or you're gonna run into a character and they're gonna say something incomprehensible, and then you're gonna say something. And they're all short scenes, but there's a lot of them. At least I felt like there were a lot of them, and it was it set the tone for sure for the game. It made me laugh. Like it felt kind of like playing a B movie, which I enjoy. I love bad movies and B movies and things like that. So I did enjoy this element of the game, but probably not in the way that they think you're enjoying it. You know what I mean?
I think I enjoyed it on a similar level to you. Like, I don't know this anime either. Like, I know these characters as archetypes, and I sort of, vaguely know, like, by name what the main 5 dudes are. But that didn't detract from it for me at all. I know that's not what you're saying, but like, if you are interested in a game like this, a very Symphony of the Night inspired, lavish pixel art, relatively short Metroidvania that's on Game Pass, if we haven't said that already, then don't let the game's incomprehensible licensed story stop you. I think the game still works without the story, and I pretty much ignored every word spoken and mashed A through them all.
Yeah,
but, whatever.
It's this one. I'm very middle ground on how much I enjoy this game. I think that it's something that you could pick up and you'll probably know within the first couple hours whether, really maybe even the first hour, if you're gonna enjoy it. It definitely
probably.
It gets, like any game like this, it gets more and more complicated. And I kind of found it more and more frustrating the deeper you got into the game, but I did overall enjoy playing it. I'm glad that we played it. It's not, we've had a whole run of games where we've been like do this, go play this game. This game is phenomenal. And I can't give it that, but I think it's worth checking out, especially if you like action platformer, Metroidvania, that sort of stuff. It's worth looking into because there is so much in here, and it's also relatively short, which is hard to find.
Yeah. And in that hour, you're going to get pretty much all of the main powers.
Yeah.
You'll get both elements. You'll get magic. You'll get the bow. Like, that's all really front loaded. So I think that's even more of a case if you're not sure. You can run through and get all of those things pretty fast.
Yeah. And for me, like, booting this game up, being somebody who has played several of the Castlevania games in the Symphony of the Night lineage, like, this was an immediate endorphin hit for me. Just, moving this character around, I was like, oh yeah, that's an Alucard. I got this. And so, like, yeah, if you boot this up and you're like, this is for me, then awesome, it's for you. If you boot this up and you're like, this isn't for me, then don't think that the plot is going to get really good towards the end and really pay off.
I got to see what happens to Parn. Carla, I'm watching you.
And so that is Record of Lodoss War - Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth - or some other punctuation or arrangement of that phrase or combo of phrases, depending on the storefront that you're looking on. I usually just search for this under Wonder Labyrinth or Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth, and it'll turn right up. But if you're looking on Game Pass, you better search for Record of Lodoss War. Speaking of, this is available on Game Pass, but it's also on Switch. I think other platforms as well. We're going to try to cover more Game Pass games because I think people are interested in, like, what's good on Game Pass as a thing. We also just bought some Xboxes, so that's also a thing. So if you have suggestions, by the way, for short games on Game Pass, that is a thing we would love to dip more into. So let us know what we should be checking out. If you're playing on other platforms, I believe this is a $15 game. Let me check that. Sorry, versions: Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series S and X, and PC. I played on PC. Minor nitpicky complaint: the PC version shows keyboard tooltip, like, images for what buttons you're supposed to press, regardless of whether you're using a Game Pass. So it would be like, hit Z to blank, even though I was using a gamepad. Drove me nuts the entire time. And price, I was looking that up, $19.99 on most of those platforms. I believe it's beginning to go on sale occasionally too. And you can also on Steam get it in a double pack with Toho Luna Nights for a small discount. So give those a shot. And that's going to be it for this week. So thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Short Game. You can find our show on the internet at www.theshortgame.net, which is where you'll find all the ways to contact us, our contact form, our email. You can find a link to our Twitter @_shortgame. You can also find us on Patreon, patreon.com/theshortgame. We very much appreciate our patrons. Patrons, I know we did not deliver yet on our promise of bringing you a video of Shane doing some dumb thing with his little ball and string toy.
Something fantastic, not
Literally,
something dumb.
No one but you has asked for, Reagan.
I am going to abuse you.
He's doing it now.
He's doing it now. He's doing it. I need a screen cap. Listeners, I promise I'm going to make that happen if you only subscribe to our Patreon. But the real benefits...
We get to 100 subscribers. Shane will...
Reagan, there's literally not another way you could have capped our Patreon.
The real benefits of our Patreon: every patron gets access to our Discord, which is where we talk about the show. We chat about what we're playing, what's coming up next, where we discuss other cool stuff like Hollow Knight. And of course, you can also and if you're a patron at the $5 level, I will send you some Short Game stickers. They are very good stickers. Yeah, that's it. So thank you and you can find me on Twitter at RaganK. That's RayGank. Laura, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Laura J. Nash.
Nate, where can people find you?
On Twitter at NateSTL.
And Shane, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at 8BitShane.
And listeners, thank you once again for joining us on this episode of The Short Game.